On today's episode of You Asked, LG G4 or Sony Bravia 9 for a bright room. What are some of the biggest takeaways from Apple's jam-packed WWDC event? And a pretty fun one, do you go with an 83-inch OLED or a 98-inch mini LED TV? Welcome back to the channel, everyone. This is You Asked, the show where we answer your tech questions. If you've got something you want to know, send your question to youasked@digitaltrends.com. And don't forget to tune in every Sunday at 7:45 a.m. Pacific to see if your question has been selected for the show. First up, Escanor asks, would you recommend the Sony Bravia 9 or LG G4 for a bright room with a decent amount of light? That's a tough one because on one hand, the LG G4 is tremendous, one of the best TVs in the last 2 years. That's pretty close to perfect. But so is the Bravia 9. As good as it gets for a mini LED TV, it's just not OLED. In just about any other side-by-side case, I'd say go with the LG for all the things OLED is known for. Rich, pure color, and unbeatable contrast. But also we tested its handling of glare and reflections pretty extensively when we compared it to the S95D and its powerful glare-free panel. And yeah, with a lot of light, you're gonna get some of that unwanted light on your screen as well. Yeah, shining an LED studio light straight into the TV is extreme, but you get the point. Given that the Sony is the brighter TV, where you're really going to see the difference between the two is when viewing HDR content in that bright room. The Bravia 9 is gonna be able to really juice up the highlights to stand out, even with a lot of light around the TV. So that would be my answer between those two. But I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't at least point out that the Samsung S95D OLED is also an option. Again, we did a full video putting it side by side with the G4 with strong light in the room. And this year, Samsung's QN90F, their top 4K mini LED TV, has that same type of glare-free panel that the S95D does. So you get the added brightness of mini LED plus that special panel to help in bright rooms. Past that, there are plenty of other differences between the LG, Sony, and Samsung options mentioned here as far as features and operating systems, but that's for another video. We've got to move on to our next question from JJ Newbold, who says, I currently have the LG C4 77-inch and love it, but I'm moving to a bigger place next year. Would you get an 83-inch C4 or a 98-inch TCL QM8 for darkroom 4K Blu-ray watching? I've been with OLED for a long time, but big is nice. Well, I certainly agree, my friend. Big is nice, and once you go big, it's hard to go back. But I would say the same for OLED TV viewing. If you were someone who was coming from the average LED TV or even a mini LED TV, I'd have no problem recommend going bigger with the 98-inch QM8. It's a phenomenal TV that just gets better every year. It's great for bright rooms and sports viewing, HDR looks great, and it's obviously really fun to watch movies and shows on a TV that size. I'm just hyping it up so you don't get the impression that I'm about to put down a TV that I would genuinely love to have. In fact, we almost literally did this same test a year ago. We put a 65-inch Sony A95L QD OLED up against the 98-inch TCL QM8. And I believe the takeaway was that the bigger TV was more fun, at least from one opinion. But that's a difference of 33 inches. It's an in-your-face difference in size that you really can't ignore. If it were an 83-inch C4 next to that QM8, I don't know, man, that's a tougher call. And given how much you've enjoyed OLED, I'd hate to see you take a step backward in terms of image quality. Not to mention, darkroom 4K Blu-ray viewing and OLED is a match made in home theater heaven. If you've invested in top quality physical media, don't skimp out on the picture quality. Get the OLED and don't worry about the extra 15 inches that you probably won't miss at all. All right, next up, editorial director Gareth Beavis joins us to talk all things Apple and WWDC.
Okay, hello, it's me, Gareth Beavis, Editorial Director for Digital Trends, and I'm here to talk to you about WWDC 2025 that's happened this week, and it's brought big changes to iOS 26, iPadOS 26, a whole visual transformation for the whole suite of different operating systems that Apple's got, and unified them across one single number, which is 26, as you can tell. Now, not a big fan of that because this is 2025, so always being 1 year ahead already feels irritating, but at least we're now working on a similar pattern so that everything from macOS, iPadOS, iOS, tvOS, visionOS are all running along the same namings, which makes it a lot easier. Right, let's get into your comments because there's been a lot of thoughts and lots of questions around what's happened this week, so I want to talk to you all about it. Number one is from Dorian Liriano. Now, he's talking about iOS 26. Now, the main change here is that it's got this new liquid glass display. Now, for you, well, I wouldn't say conspiracy theorists out there, but anyone that remembers 2010 when Apple got an exclusive license for this new material called liquid metal, which was supposed to be quite revolutionary, more scratch resistant. It was used in golf clubs. It was meant to be this new thing that would actually elevate the way that devices were made. It got used in the old SIM ejector tool. That was all it ever got used for. So I thought, is this going to be the day it happens? When I heard liquid, no, liquid glass, very different. Now, it's quite a divisive change, that one I would say. So let's dive right in and find out exactly. So again, Dorian Liriano said on Instagram, this change doesn't seem major or impressive. I'm going to search for additional context because I'm either missing something or Apple is taking us for a ride. So yes, there are some changes to the way it looks. So you've got things like clear mode to go along with dark and light. You can have the icons themselves will be a see-through. When you've got the Macs, some of the menus will be translucent. In Safari, for instance, at the bottom, everything's more rounded. Things fade in and out. Think the dynamic island that we saw on the iPhone 15 Pro Max, for example. That kind of mentality of how it shifts and switches and changes in context is how things work now. So there's lots more dynamism. The other big change, and I say big, but the sort of thing people will notice, is that the clock on the lock screen now extends up and down depending on what picture you use. So the phone is much more context aware of the picture itself, so it can actually make things feel like they're far more, they're yours. It feels like it fits much more with your own versions, your own edits. And again, while these things are major and groundbreaking, they do change the way that your phone looks. And that's been needed for quite some time because Apple, let's be honest, has been running the same software, the same look for a very long time. We needed something new. So that's good. There have been some good questions from Abdul Basid Tahir, who said, they made Windows Vista. Can't argue with that one. It does look a lot like the whole Windows Aero theme that came around with the Vista. And Henshin587 says, I like this liquid glass style. I appreciate that we're moving away from pure minimalism and adding some visual flair, like highlights and subtle visual distortions to menus and icons. That's very true. I think it does look different. I think it gives it a whole new refresh. And yes, it does aid Microsoft in the year 2000. And yes, it doesn't really change the way you use your phone too much. But I think these things are right for a redesign, and I think it's good that Apple has done that. And the way that it's brought the visual identity across all the devices, again, brings this more cohesive atmosphere. So overall, iOS 26 has gone down pretty well. These are quality of life changes. They're not massive. I do think we could do a little bit better from Apple, maybe with iOS 27, try to work out what year it is. Then we'll see something a bit different because we do need to see a lot more from Apple Intelligence. Now let's jump onto that very quickly because what's been amazing is Craig Federighi and Greg Joswiak have been interviewed. We've seen a lot of different outlets have had a chance to interview them and ask them about the delays to Apple Intelligence, to the changes to Siri. And to go on the charm offensive like this tells me one thing: they need to get the message out that Apple is not creating a chatbot. They said it last year, they've reiterated it very strongly this year. Because when people think about AI, artificial intelligence, they think about your ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity. Those are the things that people are more aware of. And the ability to chat to something and get feedback feels like what Siri should be. So therefore, the idea of an upgraded Siri feels like it should have been here by now. Apple's very clear. It says, we don't want to have a chatbot. We want to have the phone able to use generative AI to do things better for you. It's kind of doing that. Now, in my view, the way that Google has integrated Gemini is very similar to how Apple has done Apple Intelligence so far. So you've got things like visual intelligence, being able to see what's on screen right now and be able to tell you a little bit more about that. Apple has done that again and upgraded it. It is using ChatGPT though, so it's asking the question, where's your own generative AI? And Craig Federighi was very clear saying, look, we had version 1 and version 2 of this running. The version 2 is the deeper idea that we want people to use. But version 1 is the one that we've got working, and we've pushed it and it's just not performing to the level we want to. So we have to wait for V2, which is why there's a delay, because we realized we had to pivot. It is coming, but asking you all to wait. Consumers won't wait for very long. However, if you look at the integration of Gemini, for instance, on Pixel phones, it's not massive. It's very similar. You can use the Photos app, you can erase people, you can change things a little bit. You've got the image generators on device, which are very good on the Google Pixel, for instance. Not so great. The image playground is fine. Doesn't always work very well. Things like Genmoji and the new iOS 26, being able to use 2 emoji into one, I've not really got on with it so far. It would take quite a big upgrade for me to feel like, yeah, this is a really good reason to use the new Apple Intelligence, or to buy the phone for that reason alone. So that brings me on to the final thing I wanted to talk to you about, which is iPadOS 26. Now this is something that we're all very excited about, and for a very good reason, because whereas iOS 26 was mostly visual flourishes and a few tweaks under the hood, nothing massive if I'm honest, iPadOS 26 does seem to change things, because it's blurring that line between macOS and iPadOS even more than before. When the iPad first came out and started to have computing functions, people started to say, is this replacing the Mac? And incredibly, Greg Joswiak on an interview today said, in answer to the question, how do people decide between buying a Mac or an iPad right now? And he said, without a hint of irony, they should buy both. Now, I'm not sure that's entirely the right move if you're, struggling to spend thousands of dollars on different devices, especially if they're starting to get much more similar. With the new iPadOS 26, you can do so much. So first of all, you can resize windows. You can have windows that stack up on top of each other. You can lock them into thirds, into halves in the screen. So it works a lot more like you would expect a computer. And Nirav Gondia wrote an amazing piece for us so far, giving his first impressions of the beta. And his takeaway was, I always ask, would this be something that my mother or sister, who are very power users of the iPad but don't have a separate computer, is it going to transform their lives? His answer was yes, I think it is. They're going to find themselves able to do proper computing on the go, which is what they want the iPad to do in the first place. So that's really exciting. And so finally, to answer the last two questions from Wilson Negrini and Iram K. Cesani II, what's the launch date and when is the CarPlay and iPads update coming? Well, we don't know the launch date, but we can take a very good educated guess, because what we do know is that usually the new version of iOS will be delivered when the new iPhones come out, or just before, because the new iPhones always run the latest version of iOS. We've never had, or very rarely have ever had, an iPhone launched in anything other than in the middle of September. So we can fairly accurately state that the new iOS is going to come out around then. Would I expect to see iPad at the same time? Absolutely. CarPlay, well, that will come with iOS because it's kind of bundled in with the phone. Don't forget, of course, public betas will be available very soon, probably the next month or so. And while you can get the developer betas right now, I would urge massive caution with that, because unless you've got a spare device you want to try out, or unless you're very much ready for it to be quite a buggy, janky experience, Apple is very clear. These are developer betas to try out what it can do, not to create a polished day-to-day using experience, which is why I very much urge you not to try it out if you're not, able to revert, or you can update your device in a different way. Well, that's everything from me. And thank you very much for listening to all of the talk we've had on iOS 26, iPadOS 26, the new changes that are coming to the operating system in general. Thanks very much, and see you again very soon.
Thank you so much, Gareth. That's going to do it for this week's episode of You Asked. A reminder, if you have a question you want answered, send it in to youasked@digitaltrends, or leave it in the comments. Also, in the comments, if you've got experience with any of the questions or products that we mention in these videos, feel free to chime in, because I'm sure that real-world experience can help someone else who's watching. Thanks as always for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.